This is CXO Secrets, the podcast that takes you inside the minds of business and technology leaders and reveals the strategies behind their success. Coming up in today's show.
If you truly modernize an application, although it seems complex today, once you understand what a EDA or event-driven architecture looks like, you understand your environment, you understand your data, it truly becomes simpler, easier to scale and to grow because you start treating everything, all of your data, as objects.
CXO Secrets is powered by EDS, going beyond connections. Find out about upcoming C-level events, experiences, and insights at edsxevents.com. Dave Hoon, CTO at Norseman Defense Technologies. Thank you again for joining us on CXO Secrets.
Thank you for having me again, David. Appreciate it.
Now, Dave, you are, of course, a returning guest, and this is, I guess, the final part of this three-part mini-series we've been having very broadly on IT modernisation. Very quickly, though, just to catch new viewers, new listeners up, tell us what you do and who you do it for.
I am CTO for a integration company that supports the public sector in the United States. A company is Norseman Defense Technologies. We partner with just about every large OEM and manufacturer that you've heard of that we're allowed to in the U.S.
Very good. Maybe we'll come on to that a little bit more in the course of our conversation today. And today we're going to talk about application modernization. So far in our IT transformation and modernization chats, Dave, we've looked at big picture IT-driven efficiency. We've done a deep dive into edge computing. And today we're going to look more closely at this topic of application modernization. And to kick off, I think it's important to mention this. When we speak about application modernization in the enterprise, more often than not, we're not really talking about a standalone, self-contained application, an app, are we? It's more about systems of applications that work in concert, the integrations, the customizations, the middleware, the APIs to other platforms, your ERP or your CRM application, as you may refer to it on a PowerPoint or at a high level. In reality, it's a lot of closely coupled applications and integrations. And it's that close coupling between applications and application components, something that can happen by design or even organically over time. Dave, it's that can eventually become a bit of a limiting factor for organizations, particularly when it continues to grow, continues to gather moss as it rolls down the hill increasingly quickly.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. So the monolith, the application, when we have IT experts, developers, executives that are afraid if they update, let's say their CRM, that the ERP is going to break, or if they change something in an inventory system, that their website's going to break. And it's these fears that really paralyze the IT development and the innovation within an organization. And right now, the trend and really the light kind of shining, as the answer is to start treating everything as data, as an object, and as a service, and drive applications through events instead of asking a system, hey, do you have an update for me? Or is this batch process done? When something changes, advertise that to the system, to the bus, and other applications can take action from that. And it really goes to support decoupling that monolith, decoupling services, and enabling performance and really ease of operations. Sounds easier said than done.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But I think the point there, and you've really encapsulated what I hope our conversation is today really tightly there, which is great. But you've acknowledged the monolith and what the challenges are with that, and why through decoupling, through event-driven architectures and so on, there are potential benefits there. how do you articulate what those benefits are? Give me a little tick list of things that if you are going into an organization saying, we really need to address that big monolith that you've got in the basement there. I know it's going to be expensive. I know it's going to be difficult, but this is what potentially you will get from doing that, from addressing that elephant, that monolith in the room. What are those carrots at the end of the stick that you're dangling?
As you modernize applications, as you make them, let's say, quote, cloud native, ready for services, container applications, and an event-driven architecture, really what you're going to get is, I don't know, you're going to be hopefully more bored in network operations, application operations, because you get real-time recovery, you get scalability in the application, you lose some of the latency. In business sense, you really should see a competitive advantage, being able to take action as actions needed, not at the end of the day or when a script is done processing every 30 minutes or 5 minutes or, even every 30 seconds or a minute. You'll be able to take action immediately when something changes based on, a customer order in the commercial space or on market conditions or change, a news article that comes out. Being able to take action immediately. And you asked earlier about, or no, you haven't asked, but I know you're going to ask me in a little while about AI and how that plays into it. So, when I think application modernization, integrating AI and being able to kind of prompt, a user or an operator on activity to take, whether that's system operations from a CIO, CISO, CTO perspective, or business operations, being able to change your business or respond or take action to something based on an AI's recommendation of knowledge that it's continually consuming on, as in an event-driven architecture.
I don't think people needed to have looked at the show notes to have known that we were going to be talking about AI somewhere in this conversation today. As I've said many times, I can't walk to my convenience store on the corner of my street without having a conversation about AI with somebody these days. Okay, so there are a few things going on then, as we've acknowledged when talking about application modernization here. And yes, it is I guess, if not the principles, the architectures, event-driven architectures and so on. But there is also an element of the code and the platform, waving goodbye to COBOL, saying a tearful goodbye to the mainframe in the corner there, as well as re-architecting, fundamentally rethinking how your applications, the inputs, the interactions, the outputs, how they work from in a microservices or event-driven kind of system. There's a lot of moving parts there, but the code itself needs to be understood in order for it to be potentially rewritten or put into a kind of services, microservices, event-driven architecture. That's certainly one of the challenges that does fall into this conversation as well, I think.
Most definitely. I mean, you mentioned COBOL, so I've been around the block for quite a while. I mean, COBOL is one of those beasts you just can't get rid of because it works. It's stable. Companies are still, old companies are still running their businesses in a lot of cases on COBOL because they probably tried to modernize in the past and they've either failed or had challenges or they couldn't respond quickly enough because of the problems that we discussed earlier. Just the monolithic nature of those applications was so complex that you make one change and it has ripple effects that there's not a single person in an organization that knows everything that's going to be affected by a change. So you end up not changing and still sitting on COBOL or on a mainframe somewhere. I'll be the first one to go out on the limb and say, if you truly modernize an application, although it seems complex today, once you understand what a EDA or event-driven architecture looks like, you understand your environment, you understand your data, it truly becomes simpler, easier to scale and to grow because you start treating everything, all of your data as objects not just, your financial system and all the scripts that it's running and the math that it's processing, but, a customer order becomes an object, inventory item becomes an object, and every application in your environment can talk to that object or about that object in an EDA. So in some respects, it becomes much easier because you're not always flirting with the threat of taking your system down just by introducing new capability, innovating, or scaling your environment.
Yeah, all of this object-oriented stuff takes me back to my my IT study days about 30 or so years ago. But yeah, data as an object, data as a service, you mentioned a few moments ago there as well, and it is quite a change, maybe from where we've been, where it's kind of being application driven and so on. I just want to come back to AI. And you lifted Pandora's rock on that a moment ago, and I think it's interesting to reflect that, Dave, will peel back the curtain a little bit. When we first had these conversations, you and I, when we were discussing what we were going to talk about on this little series of podcasts, your reflection was that for the application modernization piece, when we spoke only a few months ago, AI wasn't necessarily ready for prime time. But then when we caught up only a few weeks ago, your indication was that had changed, that AI had evolved, matured, maybe had enough proof points and enough stories out there that it is now really is part, maybe central to the conversation as regards application modernization. And I know a number of conversations that I've had with different service providers, if nobody else. They're all over legacy code. Understand your code, let our AI have a look at your code, and we can be that subject matter expert. We can do the documentation. We can help you to migrate from one platform to another. There's a lot of those services out there. How are you seeing how AI is really adding to the ability, the readiness that organizations should feel when it comes to tackling application modernization?
So I love the use of AI and application modernization in coding. I play around with all the big names myself. Mm-hmm. Website development, application development, writing a HTML app with a script, that can play Pong on my computer, take me back to the early 80s. It's great. And I think organizations need to embrace it smartly. Enlist applications that can go, or AI implementations that can learn your environment, learn your applications, your systems, your business, use it for modeling, use it for draft code development. But I think you're still going to want that expert thinker, developer there to oversee it, to put it together, to run through testing. You can use, there's lots of tools out there that can create software bill of materials for open source systems, run through and test for security vulnerabilities, automate patching. Today, those platforms are there, and you can use AI and the agentic implementation of that to automate really that DevSec process as well. So I think there's a lot of use for AI and application modernization, but that doesn't mean you don't need folks like Norseman Defense Technologies to help you out, or partners like Dell Computing to provide trusted hardware to run it on. So
very good. I'll let you have the plug. Absolutely. But it's absolutely right. And a number of conversations that I've been having, and I know that later on, when I throw you a question from one of our previous guests as well, that this is going to come up. That there is at this stage, yes, it's very easy for us to throw AI at everything. We can wave the magic AI wand at everything, but there still needs to be a human, if not waving that wand, inspecting the rabbit that comes out of the hat, making sure it is a rabbit, making sure that it is the rabbit that you were expecting, and so on. We'll come back to AI. let's talk more conceptually about this shift that we spoke about there from these monoliths. And I can't get 2001: A Space Odyssey out of my mind whenever I talk about monoliths. And considering I'm chatting with you, Dave, that's another 2001 reference for me as well. But the composable or event-driven applications, how do you tend to conceptualize these? Because I guess if you've worked in an industry, if you worked in an organization where you're already event-driven, that's great. But if you're working in an organization that hasn't been your background and it's not something, you're much more of the traditional, here's a tin, here's an application, there's a database server, there's a web server, here's a bit of middleware and so on. It might be a little bit more difficult for us to get our heads around. So how do you conceptualize event-driven applications, Dave?
So, that's a great question. Yeah, sometimes you have to step back from, like you were alluding to, the technology, and try and just make it simpler in terms that other folks understand just more naturally in the physical world. So let's take building a home or, constructing an object. I'm currently, as everybody I work with knows, because I talk about it all the time, building a new storage facility to support all of my hobbies on my property. So I've got, 14 acres, a bunch of equipment that I like to run around on, toys for my kids. So building a big shop, it's almost done actually. But imagine in the world of the monolith, I hire a general contractor and they in-house everything they do. So that's going to be from planning and working with the county to excavation, concrete work, building the walls, insulating, electrical, plumbing, you name it. Well, if anything in their company breaks down, if somebody is out sick, the PM is out, the job supervisor's out, the project slows down. If something slows down on one of their other jobs, my job stops as well. So if we compare that to an event-driven architecture, if we compare that to a services-oriented architecture, to use some older terminology as well that's similar, now imagine that we have a job advertisement board, and I want to bring an electrician after we have the walls framed so that they can rough in the electrical. Well, when the walls are framed, the building framer can actually mark their job complete. That gets advertised directly, immediately to the electrician, so they know they can now start. And so on. So an electrician gets done, that notifies an insulation company, they can come in and overlay the walls with insulation. Insulation gets done, that notifies the drywall company, they can come in and start drywall roughing, and so on and so forth. Take that a step forward into a cloud-enabled modern application. Now I have more than one electrician. So if the electrician I normally use is busy, I'm going to notify the next available electrician that can take that job, and they're going to show up immediately and get the work, and so on down the line. And that's really, a container and microservices architecture, that the services that are ready, there's multiple implementations of that can take that job and move forward and close to real time immediately when they're ready for it. And that's really passing the message forward into the application, notifying them that something is complete or something has changed or there's new status, new value, and an application knows what to do when that happens.
I've always found your metaphors, your analogies really powerful, Dave, and that's another one of those. So as we start to think about the enterprise, are there any again, not necessarily favoring one vendor or another, but we're talking about message brokers and publish subscribe services and so on. What kind of things are we talking about? What kind of services are we talking about that we might all have heard of that play in this event-driven sort of ecosystem?
So one that we work with quite a bit is the commercially supported Kafka Confluent, which has just been acquired or announced they're being acquired by IBM. So we'll see see what changes. I mean, IBM's done a great job with Red Hat in the last few years. They haven't really changed anything that we can tell working with them as a partner. And I suspect that they'll continue that with Confluent as well. But Kafka is a great technology to use for messaging for event-driven architectures.
And going back to my days with IBM, I started about 30 years ago now, but MQ series, that whole message queuing thing going back in those days, I'm not quite sure what happened to all of that. But yeah, interesting. And I hadn't picked up on IBM picking up on commercial Kafka yet either. Thank you for that. Yep. So we've spoken about the big picture. We've looked at some of the details. We've looked at the role that AI may be able to play in the application modernization journey. I don't think we're under any illusion that application modernization is easy, though. And as we said, whenever you lift up a rock or peel off the covers off of an application, creepy crawlies can emerge. And if you're faced with the prospect that it is going to be a complicated, a risky project, it is sometimes easier just to put that rock back down, isn't it? And then see what else might deliver benefits with less cost, with less risk. So what are the conversations that you have to help organizations face up to the creepy crawlies that may crawl out as a result of opening the door onto application modernization, helping them to understand the benefits, and maybe if there is a process, I guess a best practice approach to taking a look at successful application modernization programs?
I really think helping the customer understand the benefits comes down to communicating to them in a way that makes sense or hits home. So if we work with a commercial customer, it's really talking in a lot of cases dollars and cents and competitive edge. So framing the information in concept of time and performance makes a lot of sense. When we're working with Department of Defense customers, being able to talk about application modernization in terms of disconnected operations, being able to operate entirely on the edge with a modern application that doesn't need to be cloud connected to have the same intelligence and have the same decision effect makes sense. So I mean, those are some of the ways we frame the conversation. If we truly have a customer that's afraid to take the risk, that's 100% risk adverse, I mean, we're not going to change their mind. If they have something that they believe works and they've got money to continue paying for it, and they don't want to reuse those funds to enable new capabilities, that's their prerogative. We can't always help them get out of their own way or out of their own head, unfortunately.
And you mentioned something there that as we come to the end of this mini series of conversations around modernization, actually you mentioned edge there, and that's prompted me to ask a question to you that I guess attempts to bring everything that we've spoken about together, about the role that edge, the role that application modernization, the role that, we spoke about IT simplification and IT efficiency as well. I guess this is all part, when you look at it all together, of enabling architectures that don't have to exist in a data center, that can work across geographies, from a centralized data center out to the edge as well, that can be more efficient, that can therefore be more scalable as well and more responsive to your needs. And I guess really this is all part of the same conversation about creating infrastructures that are efficient, that enable an organization to grow, and particularly for some of your defense clients, have some resiliency, have redundancy built in to enable them to work in whatever operational environment they're architected for.
100%. So event-driven architecture, AI at the edge, data at the edge, storage at the edge, all make sense for our federal customers, or a lot of our federal customers anyway. I mean, obviously we still have quite a few that need to operate in data centers centrally with huge amounts of data and historical data. But our mission partners that are really tactical in nature, that are customer facing, whether citizens or entry points for the border. Those we would consider tactical and customer facing. They're really operating independently, or should be operating independently in real time at the edge, and not reliant on network connectivity, cloud connectivity, and updates and information, and management and operations from a central repository or central point in the environment. So we a lot of times we'll work with customers. We'll roll out and deploy, a Dell PowerEdge servers, a small stack of those that are GPU enabled, and run those at the edge so that we can still do inference. We can still do vision AI at the edge, and recognize threats through video systems. We can talk through, complex, I won't call it complex, but we can talk through retraining models at the edge as well in some cases, to make them smarter in real-time situations.
So all of, again, as if we'd planned it, there is a real complementary nature to each of the three conversations we've had. And if anyone watching, listening today, who's jumped into the series, this episode, have a look back, have a look at our back catalogue, and hopefully all of the jigsaw puzzle pieces will fit together. Dave, thank you for your thoughts today on application modernisation, but also on IT efficiency and on edge as well. And I'll ask you for a call to action, if you like, where to find you later on. But any final word on what you would say to those listening today about getting some help with this stuff? Because I think if there's one thing that we have absolutely agreed on, this stuff is particularly complicated, and having an outside pair of eyes looking in on what it is that you do right now, what it is you would like to be able to do, and how to get from where you are to where you want to be, having an outside pair of eyes can be really, really helpful.
100%. So, I would love for everybody listening to give me a call. But honestly, for my public sector customers out there, and commercial listeners, I encourage everybody to move forward. If you're risk adverse, take smaller steps, but move forward, become native in the data architecture, the event architecture space, and it's going to make your lives easier. So, I've learned through many years that simpler is better. So not everything has to be complicated, but sometimes it's a longer road or difficult road to get there. So hire the expertise you need, and make sure they're truly experts so that you get it done right, the first time, and you don't have a bunch of restarts.
Thanks again for all of that, Dave. I'm not going to let you go without asking you the questions that we ask all of our guests. And as you know, this show's called CXO Secrets. And we like to ask our guests what their CXO secret is that's helped them to do what they do today. Well, Dave, you've already answered that question once before, and you've already given some advice on what advice you would give to a younger version of yourself. So my parting question to you today is this. What is a mistake or a setback that you've experienced that's taught you something valuable that you still use, that you still employ today?
Oh, wow. We don't even have enough time to talk about all my mistakes. But I think probably the biggest mistake I've made over time is padding my resume with new technologies. So developing an application that has complex databases and stored procedures and application code, just so I can learn it and use it. And, ultimately what that results in when you move on, I've moved on in my career several times to the next step. Person filling my shoes doesn't quite know how to use it, and they end up trying to reverse engineer it, redo it. So I would say, in the old adage, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Just the simpler you can make it, the better. To me, I gauge everything today with how boring it is to operate is probably how good it is to run. So I would say just keep it simple.
Stupid. We do a Pass the Question on this show where guests have the opportunity to pose a question to a future guest, whoever they may be. And we have a question for you from previous guest, Dan Van Tran, who is CTO at Collectors. And he asks this question.
So especially with us talking about AI and outcomes, I'd like to ask, what's one place you've seen AI deliver real, measurable value? And one place you think it's being forced where a simpler solution would win?
Dan, that's a great question. Thank you for that. So I think where AI is a real value is extracting information from, unstructured data. So whether it's parsing PDFs, looking back at historical knowledge in an organization and using that to inform an inference model, an LLM for workforce knowledge management is a great place to use it. Structured chaos in an organization, like getting a handle on things changing and modeling within an organization is great. Where I think it's being forced is when you start talking about, I'll just call it basic math and concrete formulas. So in finances, there's not a whole lot of ways of being creative in financing. If you have good CPAs working for you, you have folks that already have that knowledge. Not sure using AI as a calculator is the best approach, and maybe shy away from that investment.
Finally, what question would you like me to put to a guest on a future episode?
I would love to know how organizations with the introduction of AI into technologies are handling hiring actions. So I asked the next guest, are you looking at changing the way you hire your future talent? Are you still looking for experts in the syntax of application coding, in the syntax of CLI for network operations? Are you really looking for critical technical thinkers that can be creative and implement AI for that I'll call it syntax knowledge?
Great question. As always, I look forward to asking it. Dave, it's been great to speak with you again. For one final time, if anyone wants to follow your insights, learn more about what you do at Norseman, where should they go?
Well, you can find us on LinkedIn at Norseman Defense Technologies. You can find me at David Hoon on LinkedIn or norseman.com on the web.
Dave Hoon, CTO at Norseman. Thank you for joining us on CXO Secrets.
Thank you, David.